From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, J.I. Kislak, members of the Kislak Foundation, and members of the Library of Congress's Madison Council, scholars, and members of the public. We welcome you to the Library of Congress this evening for the 7th J.I. Kislak Lecture, and we are very grateful for your patience while we worked on a little bit of a technical glitch. I know that Richard's going to talk about mysterious collapse of major culture tonight, and I kept thinking through my mind, oh my goodness, I hope that there's not a direct connection here to contemporary culture. So we will leave that to the Q&A. But in the meantime, let me just say that this lecture series is part of many public outreach and research activities that are focused here and housed here at the Library of Congress as a direct result from the inspiration and the enablement by the incredible gift of Mr. Kislak to the Library of Congress of his collection of more than 3,000 rare maps, documents, paintings, prints, and artifacts that shed light on all aspects of life: war, intelligence, agricultural science, timekeeping, medicine, of indigenous peoples, spanning the pre-contact cultures of Mesoamerica in the geographic region that now includes most of modern-day Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Western Honduras, and El Salvador. This lecture series, numerous programs for every audience, from school children to scholars in the field, Kislak residential fellowships, and a designated curator, who you will meet shortly, enable the library to claim an important role in the discovery of new insights into these indigenous cultures and the drama of their encounters with European explorers and settlers. And these materials are brought together with the incredible and unparalleled other collections of the Library of Congress and the staff experts who live and work among these materials. So it is absolutely my pleasure this evening to be able to bring to the podium J.I. Kislak, who really was, whose vision it was to have this collection at the Library of Congress and to generously donate it to us, and then to continue through the works of his family and the foundation to guide the access and use of the collection since the initial gift. So without further ado, and please with a resounding applause, Jay, will you please come to the podium?
I was wondering whom she was talking about. I think I think this guy we're going to hear talk tonight is fantastic. I had the great pleasure of riding with him in a helicopter over much of the places and landing at most of the places that you're going to see him talk about tonight. He's a fantastic archaeologist and a great scholar. Let me just say, in response to what Roe Schaefer said, whatever we gave to the library, we gave so that we could have a chance to see it all in one place. We had things under the beds. We had things in storage. We had these great paintings, which some of you may have seen, of the conquest by the Indians in the early 1600s in Mexico. It was 100 years earlier that the Europeans were here, and that's the things the era that we cover, starting with Columbus and going through with original documents of Pizarro and Cortez and Las Casas and all the others. And we couldn't get anything earlier written about America after we got several copies of the Columbus letter of 1492, which we got in 1490. We got one in 1493 and 94. We couldn't get anything earlier. We got involved with pre-Columbian because the Mayans had the only written language. And we're going to hear more in a few minutes from Dr. Hansen. Mr. Dunkelman, who is here with us, is the curator of our collection, who has put most of these things together, which those of you who visit on the second floor here will see when you go to see it. But thank you all for coming, and have a great time.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I'm John Hessler. I'm the curator of the J.I. Kislak collection here at the Library of Congress. And as Roberta Schaefer mentioned, this is the 7th Kislak lecture in the history of the early Americas. Now, the great French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss once remarked after a few weeks in the Brazilian outback that he hated field work, and he was a man for the study, not for the field. Tonight's speaker, Richard Hansen, is a man for the jungle. He is the embodiment of what all of you think of when you hear the word archaeologist. Now, I mean real archaeologists, not the movie ones. The ones who are a combination of scientists, art historians, adventurers, and fundraisers. He is a professor of anthropology and archaeology at the University of Utah and director of the Mirador Basin Project. And for several decades, he has worked to map and excavate many Maya sites in the remote and largely unexplored region of the northern Pitan of Guatemala. In the late 1980s and 1990s, Richard and his teams made a series of major discoveries of large Maya buildings and cities in the Mirador Basin that have pushed back our notions of what we think of as Maya civilization deep into the pre-classic period. If you want to visit Richard's remote excavations, you only have two options. As Jay mentioned, one, a helicopter, but as I would prefer, a 3-day walk through the lowland jungle, where you can get a sense of the flora and fauna that consume the minds and art of the Maya. Besides his excavations, Richard has also taken a profound and dedicated interest in the preservation of the environment of the region and the problems of logging, narcotics trafficking, and slash-and-burn agriculture that pervade the lives of many of Guatemala's poorest citizens. It gives me great pleasure, and indeed it is an honor, to introduce Richard Hansen, the 7th J.I. Kislak Lecturer in the History of the Early Americas at the Library of Congress. Richard.
What an honor to be here today. Thank you very much, and what a privilege to be here. I had the distinct honor of being with Jay Kislak a few years ago. We went to San Bartolo to see the murals at San Bartolo. Then we went to Mirador, and what an unforgettable experience, and an honor to be with you, Jay. It really is a real tribute to you, and my profound gratitude for what you have done with the Library of Congress here, and incredible. I had the privilege of John and I and Art Dunkelman and Julie and Phyllis were in the collections tonight, or this afternoon, looking at the material that's in storage here, and you are all in for a wonderful experience to see what the Kislak collection will mean to the Library of Congress. There are pieces there that I have never seen anywhere else, and it's going to be an extraordinary experience. Also, my son is here tonight with me, one of my best archaeologists, and happens to be an advanced medical student at Duke University. So he's with us tonight. Landon, say hi. He took archaeology for years. We'll see some of his work tonight. But he's becoming a brain surgeon at Duke so he can give me my lobotomy. And I can't wait, actually. Also, Cynthia Pereira is with us tonight. Cynthia Pereira, representing the Department of Interior of the United States. She and her family have been great supporters of the project. The Department of Interior is working with us and providing funding for some of the work that you'll be seeing here tonight. So, indeed, an honor to be here, and thank you for the time. If we could turn off some of these lights, I think it'd just be right. You don't want to see me, you want to see the screen. So if we can hit the lights, knock them down, knock these bright ones off here so we have that, that'll be great. All right. Not happening, I don't know. Any way to turn the lights down? Oh, you need them for the camera? Oh, boy. All right, let's talk about the Mirador Basin, and I'm going to talk about some of the things that we understand here. First of all, a message from our sponsors. Without these people, including the Kislak Foundation, none of this could have happened. So indeed, a tremendous credit to the people that make this happen. And good ideas without funding are only dreams. They never become realities. So it's critical that we understand that particular point. I also want to point out that the Maya are one of 5 founding civilizations of the world. A founding civilization is a society that develops written script. And we have the Chinese, you have the Harappan Indus Valley societies, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Mesoamerica, the only societies in the world that developed a written script. Everybody else is a subsidiary of that and a branch of that kind of work. And of course, Guatemala is one of the most beautiful countries in the world, geographically and geologically. Incredible amount of active volcanoes in the southern and the highland areas. Extraordinarily unique cultural the cultural societies are still found there, living much the same they have for thousands of years, and they're beautiful people, and wearing textiles and doing some of the same rituals they have for thousands of years. However, when we talk about, and I apologize for the chronologies here, and I've got them in another version, I have it in English, but this is Spanish. When we talk about Mesoamerican chronology, we talk about 3 principal periods of time. You talk about the post-classic between 900 and 1511 AD, which is most the stuff you see in the Yucatan, or the classic period from 300 to 900 AD. In fact, 98% of all the ruins that you see in Mexico or Central America are either classic or post-classic. But the pre-classic is much more enigmatic, a period we know much less about. And of course, the classic period is a time when we had extraordinary architecture, palaces, beautiful eccentric flints like you see here, royal tombs like that of Palenque, like a Pakal at Palenque. You have beautiful hieroglyphic scripts and stelae and architecture of extraordinary capability. And of course, because of the epigraphic work that we've been able to do, we now know a great deal about who these people were and what they accomplished. We know the story of Hasao Chankawil, for example, who brought Tikal out of the doldrums and conquered Calakmul. And this is a reconstruction of what we think he looked like based on his funerary monuments, on his funerary clothing, and on the stele that we have standing in front of a building that he commissioned, 5D 33 at Tikal. The clothing that you see is all based on his burial paraphernalia. Also, to understand origins and collapse of a society, you have to understand 3 fundamental processes. First, you have to understand, you have to understand the processes that led to the cultural complexity. You have to understand the dynamics that maintained that, the development systems. And then you have to understand the processes that led them to demographic collapse. And all of these factors involve, for example, what leads to cultural complexity. And you look at our own society, you see the same pattern, the same format. You have to have natural resources, agricultural systems, logistics systems, communication systems, political, religious, and economic ideology. You have to have, it has to be united and constant. You have to have a centralization of civil and religious authority, and the public acceptance of that religious and civil authority. You have to have a social organic solidarity, meaning you have to be able to make societies cohesive. Okay? You have to have the formation of laws and social order. You have to have educational systems to teach and maintain the values and provide new information and technology for the public good. Now, these are all part of the systems that make this happen, all right? That's how you become complex. To maintain that, though, you have to have respect and care of the environment, develop your logistics system, sustainable agricultural, social solidarity. I want to point out that you have to have a strong military system as well to defend yourself against the societies that would see that as a threat. You have to have intelligence systems, you have to have public works projects and incentive programs for productivity. Now, what leads to demographic collapse? Negligence in recognizing points 1 and 2 up above. The abuse and degradation of the environment and conspicuous consumption of resources without public benefits. The failure of agricultural systems, degradation of defensive systems, loss of social and educational values, disintegration of systems of exchange and commerce, and political truths versus absolute truths. Okay? And we can see all of this in the archaeological record. We can see this in the archaeological record. And also one other clarification. When we talk about collapse, we talk about two concepts here. One is abandonment. Abandonment is the leaving of a place restricted in time and duration. Case in point, I use here Tenochtitlan, in the capital of the Aztecs, when Cortez came in 1519. Or Dresden, Germany in World War II. We firebombed Dresden, Germany. And are there populations in Dresden today? Of course. So that's an abandonment. Hiroshima and Nagasaki are good examples of this. Rome, London, and the Black Plagues of London essentially abandoned the city for the most part. We have populations today. A collapse is the destruction or ruin of a system or organization that's broad in size and for an extended period of time. Case in point, Babylon, Mesa Verde, Chernobyl. When can we get back into Chernobyl? I think the scholars tell us 10,000 years we can get back into Chernobyl. Or the southern Maya lowlands. And this is what we're going to be dealing with today. Now, the area of interest here has been, of course, Mesoamerica is the most complex societies in all the Western Hemisphere. All the range that you see here is the area of the most sophisticated societies that we have. The area that I want to talk about in particular is this area of northern Guatemala, which is founded, this is the border with Mexico here, and you see this blue over here is complete deforestation, cattle pastures. This photo was taken in 1992 and published by Jim Nations as part of that group. He's here tonight. Jim Nations is one of the scholars that was delving and poking around out in here when I first started working here in 1978. But the red that you see is high upland forest. And the patch of blue in the middle in here, this patch that's a green patch actually, is the area we call the Mirador Basin. And it's different because it has, and by any infrared photograph you look at, you can see this incredible patch of blue that's found in this area. It's completely surrounded and by what we call bajos, or seasonal swamps. The most inhospitable place you could possibly exist today. Extraordinarily dense concentration of swamps that are found in this area because water doesn't exist on a hill. It only exists where the water stagnates. Water flows into it and stagnates there. And it's in this area that we have the most unusual. It's actually crosses the border. Here's the border with Mexico. Crosses up, and here's the site of Calakmul in the very northern edge of this. And it's completely a contained biological and cultural system. Now, let's go back to the infrared photographs. You can see that patch of blue is dominated and surrounded by a range of hills. And you can see these hills here. Here's the lowland forest within the basin, and here's the range of hills that surround it. These hills are ranged from 200 to 300 meters high. Actually, they're quite low. But 300 meters are found in this. They're about 5 kilometers wide, a ring of these hills, so that it makes the yellow that you see is the hills that surround the system. And they can see from any point in the basin, you can see that range here of these hills that completely surround and contain the Mirador Basin. It can be seen from any point in the Petén. within the basin, that is. So it's a geographically defined cultural and natural system, completely contained, and it's surrounded by and identified by the concentration of bajos that are found there. Even the soils from these areas are radically different from all the rest of the soils in Petén. The different types of minerals, such as todorokite, for example, is a mineral associated with magnesium, but only found in the Mirador Basin, not found in any other part of the Petén. Because of that unique geological formation, it has a unique variety of flora and fauna. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But what is fascinating is that this is a contained system that flourishes there. And what makes it even more interesting is the fact that this area, this confined, geographically defined area, has the largest ancient cities in the Western Hemisphere. It has the largest pyramids in volume in the world. It has the tallest pyramids in the Americas. It has the earliest Maya cities, unique concentration of early Maya cities, the first freeway system in the world. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about freeway systems. We have a great one in the US, great one in Germany, the Autobahn in Germany. The first one was in the Mirador Basin. The first political state in the Western Hemisphere. Art and architecture, world-class status, one of 5 founding civilizations of the world. The concept of zero was invented in this area, mathematical calculations, and the cradle of Maya civilization. Also the greatest concentration of jaguars in the world. We have evidence of ancient climate change there. New species of insects. We've identified 14 new species of moth and 1 new species of fly. I'll talk about that in just a second. Area of unique bird populations, 1.6 million acres of pristine tropical forest, and a new model for conservation and development under extreme threat. Now, as I said, this is a dense, the last area of tropical forest left in Central America. It's got all the species you would expect to find in a tropic forest system, including this rare bat. You notice that unusual bat there, the false vampire bat. It's truly one of the last refuges for this bat in the world. But all the species you expect to find in a tropical forest system is found here. The monkeys, the orchids, the jaguars, the crocodiles, the tapir are all found, as well as a wide range of reptiles and amphibians. And of course, we'll talk about reptiles in just a minute when we talk about the original name of the system. We're working with Cornell Ornithology Lab. The ornithology lab at Cornell is the best in the world in bird identification. We're working with Cornell and doing a study of the birds of the Mirador Basin. We just finished a study of the insects, and it's published in this book. Just came out this last year. The insects, the tropical, it's published in English and Spanish, by the way, the tropical insects of the ancient Khan Kingdom of Mesoamerica, in which we identify and point out the species there under the direction of Dr. Jack Schuster and Jose Monzon. And these are just a few of the new species that we're now introducing to the world that exist only in the basin, not found at Tikal, not found in other parts of the Petén. We found them exclusively in the Mirador Basin. We also have a unique system of vegetation there. In fact, we have 5 types of tropical forest in the Mirador Basin. And these, actually there's 6 types. The one type is found on the other side of the basin in Campeche, Mexico. 6 types of tropical forest. Tikal has 2 types of tropical forest. And because of the wide range of forest, we have a much better and broader biodiversity than we have in other parts of the area. We also have the unique concentration of jaguars. And the jaguars here are, well, the Amazon has 3 jaguars per 100 square kilometers. The Mirador Basin has 11.28 jaguars per 11 square kilometers. And what makes it particularly fascinating is that the system is capable of maintaining that concentration of jaguars. The problem is when you get a road. Now, this road is a logging road or a chate road or a chicle road. You get a small community residing here, and that's when we have the population start to appear. So once you get a tropical forest system with a chainsaw, it's cut in just a couple of weeks and burned to the ground. This is on a large scale. This is the logging road that goes out of Carmelita, and you can see the extent of the deforestation that's occurring along where they have access to a road. And it's not only in Guatemala, however, it's through Mexico. All the red dots that you see here represent, these are massive deforestation, broad-scale deforestation where it's burned to the ground completely. And of course, we've been charting this very carefully with satellite systems from 2003. We monitored all these red dots that you see now represent cattle pastures. And this is the 2009 fires. All the white dots you see here are the 2009 fires. And of course, by 2010, we lost 1,063 square kilometers of forest just in this area. So this is all that we have left. This is it, north of the Amazon. There is no more. And these fires are massive. They're all intentionally set. They only exist where you have cutting with a chainsaw. So they cut these fires, they cut this forest, they burn it. This is a photograph on April 3rd, 2012, and you can see right to the edge of the basin where the smoke, by the way, is closing the schools in Houston, Texas. So it has a profound impact on that. And if it gets the smoke from the Mirador Basin, it must be getting the oxygen as well. In fact, the estimates are that 70% of the oxygen in the American Midwest comes from the Mirador Basin. So if we like to breathe, this is of interest to us, you see, because it has a profound impact on us. By 2012, the deforestation is even more pronounced. This is the area of the Mirador Basin, and all the red dots here are complete and utter devastation. It's complete. And so it's a matter now of finding out how we can save what's left. This is Laguna de Tigre National Park. All this has disappeared in the last 3 years down in through here. And of course, where the logging roads occurred is where we have massive deforestation that's occurring. And if it wasn't for one factor, I would say we've lost this. It's hopeless. And the one factor that we have the ace up our sleeve are the concentration of large and early ancient cities that are found there. These sites, all the sites that you see here are cities that we've now mapped and excavated 51 cities in the basin in the last 34 years. And the ones with the gold pyramids are sites that are as large as or larger than Tikal, Guatemala. So we are now for the first time exploring and mapping these sites. Here's the Tikal National Park down here. But look, there's Tikal by itself. You have a few little sites like Himbal and around Tikal. But look at the concentration of large and early sites that we have in the Mirador Basin, including up to Calakmul in the northern side. Again, the concentration of sites is unusual in this area. To the west of us, we have no sites in this region here. To the east of us, very few sites. But the concentration of sites within the confines of the basin make it a unique phenomenon demographically and geologically. Now, one of the things that's also interesting is the concentration of bajos that are in this area. Again, nobody would settle there today in their right mind. These swamps are but we know anciently they look like this. These are the ancient fossil remnants of the ancient system. They were grassland marshes originally. And of course, we know also from isotope data that originally these marshes were C4 plants, or grass and corn plants. And then they, as they were sedimented in, as it filled in, they became the C3 plants, which are the tropical forest we know today. We also know from the pollen cores that we've taken from numerous areas out here and numerous lakes in the western edge of the basin particularly, we know and can identify the environmental impact of human presence and when human beings first appeared in this area. But we do know, however, we have a solid chronological sequence of flora and fauna, particularly flora, from 9,000 BC in a continual sequence all the way to the present day. But the first real occupation of this area occurred around 2600 BC. We find these consistently, these dates around 2600 BC, even though we go back to 8 and 9,000 BC, we have a remarkable concentration of early dates of the early period around 2600 when we have settlers that are pre-ceramic populations that are residing near these swamps. living in the swamps, chipping stones, but no ceramics. Must be using gourds. And here is a packed earthen floor and a post hole. I ignored the carbon samples out of these post holes because I thought they were associated with these walls that date to around 1200 BC. But when I ran the samples, we have consistently from all the post holes, this was a residence that was burned at 2600 BC. So we have evidence of this first occupation. And of course, the dominant site of that whole area is El Mirador, the way we see it today and the way it exists. This is truly the capital of the Maya world, the largest site in the Western Hemisphere. We have 38 square kilometers of monumental architecture that's concentrated out here, dominated by two primary pyramids, the Pyramid of Danta on the east side, the Pyramid of Tigre on the west side, and a continual evidence of a sedentary presence by about 1000 BC, in which the ceramics that we find are consistent with this time period. In fact, we have more ceramics from the Middle Preclassic period than all the other sites in the Petén combined. And this is a concentration due to the concentration of settlements that are residing here beginning around 1000 BC and developing a level of complexity. You can see by the tecomate forms that we have. A tecomate are these restricted rim vessels that probably replicated tecomate or gourds. The first vessels were probably gourds, and these tecomates represent those. But other decorative techniques are found in these areas, and because they're associated with these swamps, entirely based on the swamps. One of the sites in the southern part of the basin was a site called El Pesquero. We found this building underneath a late preclassic building dating to about 200 BC, but inside was a building in all of its original color, and with a roof comb to boot. And even these unusual masks that you see, these very unusual, found on the corners here of these are found on the corners of this particular building. And the ceramics are consistently Middle Preclassic ceramics at about 700 BC. The carbon dates also verify that same amount of date. But these ceramics from the Middle Preclassic period are found in numerous sites throughout the Mirador Basin. And we can say then that the origins of complex societies in the Maya world begin no later than the Middle Preclassic period. Between 1000 BC and 600 BC, these societies are flourishing. We also know they developed the concept of kingship early in time. One of the elements of kingship is what we call the woven mat motif, in which they have a woven mat as a symbol of royalty, and these appear in the earliest contexts that we have, indicating that there was a concept of elite status. When Moctezuma, the Aztec emperor, greeted Cortez in 1519, he was never allowed to touch the ground. He was always walking on mats. And we suspect the same behavior was occurring with the early Maya. These were societies that laid the mat down for the king. And he was walking on mats all the time, hence the symbolism of the mat. Also, the three prongs of the corn god are evident. And we have these figurines showing the human presence. We also know they were developing a vibrant trade system. By about 1000 to 800 BC, they were importing shells. And these are Strombus pugilis shells from the Caribbean. And only in this period of time do we find these shells. There is no period of time subsequently that we find these shells. And not only that, but we believe that these shells are a form of currency. They're not used as decoration, they're not used as jewelry, but they're a currency perhaps similar to the South Sea Islands concept, where they're using shell as a currency. And we believe that this is the same. These are always found in ritual contexts, but never as jewelry and never in burials. But we also know that they were using cotton cloth, and we were also placed a level of stucco on vessels. We saw today in the Kislak collection down below a beautiful Middle Preclassic vessel that was stuccoed. 17% of our ceramics from the Middle Preclassic are of a thin layer of plaster, of stucco on them. Hence, we realize we can't wash them. All the earlier projects, you dump the ceramics and they wash it, they lose that stucco. But it's a fine level. This is a Middle Preclassic, sure, but you can see the stucco on a finely slipped surface that's found there. By this time also, they were developing elite status. And look at this, look at the skull, that deformed skull that we find there, typical of what we find in the figurines. We find the same deformity there, and status such as this human incisor, dated to, by the way, to 800 BC, with an inlaid hematite in the tooth. So when you smile, you had a teeth full of jade or hematite. But these appear, and we also know that there was a unique form of architecture. The architecture of the earliest Maya was oriented on an east-west axis, where the Olmec sites, which were contemporaneous, are on a north-south axis, and completely different from the Olmec population. Of course, the largest site that we have is known as El Mirador, and Mirador is this is all part of the city, the civic center of the city, but the residential areas of the city are linked by causeways to the central part of the city. And the question is, why were they there? What brought them there in the first place? As I told you before, the economic engines of the entire system were these swamps, these organic, treeless, but grass-covered swamps in which the Maya were actually dragging mud and muck out of those swamps and farming and building extraordinary agricultural terraces. This is an example of one of the agricultural terraces that we found. We found numerous of these terraces, by the way, in which we have a layer of, my archaeologist, Gustavo Martinez, is sitting on, kneeling on a lime-covered surface of an ancient field. But he's excavating the imported mud surface of these other fields. So I'll give you an example of the imported mud. There's another good example of how mud was brought in by the thousands of tons out of the swamps into terrace systems. But the phytoliths that we recover from these swamps show that there was corn and squash and beans and cotton and cacao and palms growing on all these terrace systems. So that wherever you had a swamp, they were dragging the mud up literally by the thousands of tons up the causeways and into the cities, so that every square available meter of surface area was productive. In Washington today and in all our parks in the United States, we have trees and flowers and grass. They had corn, squash, beans, cacao, productivity. And it gave them the economic clout to do what they did subsequently. This is the group 18 at Nakbe. This is the field. You can see they put a layer of lime on there for two reasons. Number one, the lime was to alter the pH of the acidic soils. And number two, it impeded the intrusion of ants into the crops. So the Maya knew a very early period of time. They also developed a Chinampa system. The Chinampa system was found in the Aztecs when Cortez came in 1519. Extraordinarily productive systems where the Aztecs were dragging mud out and building this rich organic surface levels here. Well, this image here is abbreviated because we now have these chinampas that are 50 meters wide, not this narrow little band that you see here. But we actually can find these chinampas. We still have these chinampas visible out here in the, you see the layer, the perpendicular layers here are these chinampas found in the swamps that surround El Mirador today. By about 300 BC, then, the sites of Xulnal, Nakbe, Mirador, Paixban, Tintal, Huacna, Nachtun, and Calakmul became the native giants of the Western Hemisphere. And one of the things that gave them an increasing social and political complexity was the development of road systems. Now, in the United States, we entered into the industrial age when we put the Transcontinental Railroad. And subsequently to that, we have an incredible freeway system that links us all together. A product that lands in Los Angeles in 3 days is here, and 2 days is here in Washington, and vice versa. And that's what makes us a kind of a homogeneous society. And the Maya figured out that same thing. The enormous causeways. These causeways, you see one going across here, are 40 to 50 meters wide, 40 to 50 yards wide, if you will, and 2 to 8 yards high, okay? And constructed of solid fill. Here you see the ground level, down here at the ground level, the edge of the causeway, and it goes up here and goes across for 40 to 50 yards across and then back down again. So they're elevated causeways that in Maya are called Nakbe or Sakbeob. Sak is white and Bay is road, the white roads. And sure enough, there's a thick layer. Here's the ground surface of the excavations here. And you can see the thick layer of plaster. These were white roads, extraordinarily paved, with thick, thick layers of plaster. And we can see these roads everywhere in the Mirador Basin. This is a road from Calakmul. This is the site of Calakmul. This was just found recently, by the way. It's never been tested yet, but we found the ancient causeway when they got a 1 meter resolution. When Google Earth got a 1 meter resolution, you can see the causeway here that comes across this area. This is not a classic period causeway. This is a pre-classic period causeway, and it's one of the things that gave them the economic power. It gave them formed the first political and economic state in the Western Hemisphere and allowed the extraordinary manifestations. One of the cities that's united by these causeways is the city of Tintal. Tintal is the second largest site in the Maya world, and one of the things that makes it particularly interesting is the huge moat, the artificial moat that surrounds part of the city, the central part of the city. We just finished excavations a few months ago of the moat at Tintal and discovered that the entire construction from beginning to end was done in the pre-classic period, the late pre-classic period before the time of Christ. So it's obvious that this was all part of an elaborate system. El Mirador, of course, is the largest site that we have in the lowlands. Is by looking at this is just the downtown area of the architecture. We mapped this with total station technology, which means that we've done it on the ground with laser instruments and with mirrors. And we have the dense concentration of architecture. This building here, that's 140, 1.5 football fields from here to here. Give you an idea of the size and scale and the concentration of major architecture that's found there. But these sites are dominated by massive architecture. And not only are they large, but they're also in a unique format. This is the Pyramid of Tigre, which has the massive, it's a massive structure, but it has 3 summits on the top. The 3 summits, the triadic pattern of architecture, which you see the central dominant building and the 2 flanking substructures on both sides here, make it what we call a triadic pattern of architecture. We believe this to be symbolic of the creation stones of the Maya. Now, when we talk about creation stones, we talk about Dennis Tedlock, actually, was the one that came up with this. He was in his conversations and translating the Popol Vuh, which is the creation story of the Maya. He heard the Maya priests talking about the celestial hearth. Now, in every Maya house today, there are 3 stones. They cook on those 3 stones. And of course, every morning the Maya mother and housewife gets up and fans the ashes and creates life for the family. They were talking about the 3 stones of the celestial hearth. And to find out that this was a part of the constellation of Orion, where we have the end star of the belt and the 2 knees form the celestial hearth. And the nebula in the middle, nebula M42, was in the middle, is the fires of creation. I don't know how the Maya knew that that nebula is really a star generator. It really is a creator. It creates things. But we find this same behavior, the 3 stones portrayed in the plazas at sites like Izapa, which portray these 3 stones that are there representing the creation. Monumentality also seems to be a particular focus at early period of time. The great city of Tikal, many of you are familiar with Tikal, a beautiful site, a World Heritage site. And it's, by the way, there wouldn't be a single tree there if it wasn't for this city. We know that because it's cut to the edge of the park on all sides. But the site is what was responsible for the conservation of these sites. But if you take the Pyramid of Tigre, which is the 2nd largest at Mirador, and put it at the same scale in Tikal, it covers all of Temple 1, all of Temple 2, all of the plaza, all of the North Acropolis inside one building that's 1,000 years earlier in time. So it has a unique focus is on monumentality and the focus also on a united cosmology, a united vision that brought all these together. This is particularly evident when we look at the buildings such as this is a map, a 2D map done. You can see the 1, 2, 3 pattern. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, on and on and on it goes. The triadic pattern dominates this early massive architecture, and this is one of the things that's characteristic of this period of time by about 300 BC. We don't find it earlier than that. We also know these were planned cities. The buildings were carefully aligned and carefully orchestrated to make particular alignments with architecture and formats. The largest building at the site is called Danta, meaning tapir. Tapir is the largest animal in the Maya forest, and we have this structure dominating the eastern side of El Mirador. This was published, by the way, in Smithsonian Magazine of May of 2011. You can find this, there's a cover story, Smithsonian, of 2011. And you can see the size and scale of this building, which is 600 meters, 600 yards at a base by 330 yards wide and 72 yards high, making it about 2.8 million cubic meters of fill, of construction fill, which is 200,000 cubic meters of fill, larger than the largest pyramids of Egypt. So and keep in mind, this was done without wheels, without carts, without beasts of burden. This was genuine human labor, blood, sweat, and tears, which makes it one of the most fascinating stories in the world as far as the human saga that took place here. The stonework is still visible on some of these buildings. We've done major work on these structures, exposing art, architecture, stairways, masks, and found that it certainly dates this structure by about 200 BC. The ceramics from this time period are also consistent. That's the only time in the Maya history that we have such uniform ceramics, from the very tip of the Yucatan all the way to Copan, Honduras. The ceramics are the same. It's the same form, the same shape. They even carved stone to be similar to the ceramic in form, but the same dominating, and we believe the state was the impetus for this particular society. We've also been doing work on building. This is the oldest exposed standing wall in Mesoamerica that we have. A 200 BC wall, that was the way it was. We didn't have to excavate it, we just consolidated it. Jay Kislak and I got the privilege of sitting together on the stairways of this step of this building. But it's, for the first time now, we can expose the art and architecture. So we have the jaguar paw motif that you see here. Here are the jaguar claws and my little, the jaguar claws, there we go. The jaguar claws up in here, and the ear spool on the sides of these colossal heads, which are still preserved and now exposed for tourism with the original colors, and we can now reconstruct the original form and shape of the architecture of these buildings. We also know the triad. You see this is the Jaguar Paw Temple, part of the Tigre complex, and you can see the form and shape of these particular buildings, the triad style, and the art that decorates the stairways near the top summit of these buildings. Also, we know the original colors of the buildings, including a building found inside the Jaguar Paw Temple that dates to about 600 BC. And according to ceramics and carbon dates. And the ceramics that are found here and the art is found here is predominant in this particular region, so that we have this particular mask and with all of the symbols of royal authority found here and these unusual heads. I would have bet my bottom dollar a few years ago that no mask exists prior to 300 BC. Only to find that we have mass at 600 BC in extraordinary complexity. This is coeval with the Olmec. And this is significant because of the work at sites like Nakbe, which is close by, also have 50 vertical meters of mass in excellent preservation. At the time I excavated these mass in 1992, the government asked me to rebury them so that we could protect them. Thank heavens they did, because I didn't have the technology then to leave them exposed. And we have that technology now, and it's a whole different story now. One of the most recent discoveries that we had was the discovery of the water collection systems. When you have 200,000 people in a city and no lakes or rivers, how do you water them? How do you provide the water for bathing, for drinking, for cooking? for making mortars and mixtures and plasters. How do you provide that type of water? Well, to understand the water collection system, we discovered that the Maya were using every plaza and every available surface area to channel water into a system of pools, system of tanks, which you see here, joined by, in this case, dual waterfall system. And here's the dual waterfall up here. You see the dual waterfall system here. But the edges of their pools were lined with art, extraordinary art of incredible complexity. And not only that, but the art depicts the entire cosmology of the Maya, from the great creator god of Itzamna to the rain god Chak to the hero twins of the Popol Vuh. Now, the Popol Vuh was found in 1700 in Chichicastenango, Guatemala, and was assumed to be a Spanish-contaminated and Christian-contaminated document. Only to find that here we have an interesting case where you have an individual who's swimming, by the way. This individual is there you see, there's the face and the headdress, the ear spool, his arms, his torso, his one leg here and another leg up here. And on his rump right here is another face, another head looking up with a closed eye and something red in the mouth. We don't really understand what that's there. And a helmet on. And then a ball, which stands for the number 1 in all Maya languages. Hun is the word for 1 in all Maya languages. So essentially we believe this to be the Hunahpu, who was decapitated. And by the way, this individual is decapitated. There's a blood scroll that comes out of the decapitated, severed head there. This is Hunahpu being carried by his son, Hunahpu. Now, if that argument is valid, then the other guy on the other side should be Ishbalamke. Now, Ishbalamke was the brother of the Hunahpu. This is a depiction, a Terry Rutledge depiction of the hero twins playing the evil lords of the underworld in an underworld ball game. We actually know what these guys look like because these are the scenes as the Maya depicted them on their ceramics. This is their version of hell and the characters that make it happen. Well, here are the hero twins, and a very prominent concept of this. We find these even in the late classic Codex-style pottery. Codex-style pottery, we find the hero twins portrayed here. We find, for example, the glyph actually says Hun Ahau, which is this individual here, and Yash Balam, which in Quiche is Ishbalamke. So you have, and it's got jaguar characteristics, and they're bringing forth their father, the maize god, out of the back of a turtle shell. Well, we find numerous depictions of these same characters in the Preclassic. Juan Antonio Valdez found in Group H at Washaktun these same characters with the decapitated head of their father, Hunahpu, on both sides of the building. And we found that this, not only do we have the presence of these hero twins, but we have the supreme deity of all Maya cosmology, Itzamna. This is the old god where you have the big nose on him, the sunken teeth, he has a beard, and he has a bird body with wings and bird feet here. By the way, this is how delicate it was. We could have pushed our fingers through the stucco. It was that we had to consolidate this. It took us a whole team of, with support from Department of Interior and the foundation in Guatemala. We were able to provide a whole team of restoration experts to consolidate this art so that this is the way it was, and this is the way it is today, the way it was, the way it is now, consolidated and visible for public support. But what lets us see are the original colors of this art, and this is this is Hunahpu here. This is Ishbalamke. Balam is jaguar, by the way, the word for jaguar. He's got a jaguar headdress on and a tail, where his brother has, who's Hunahpu, has the head of Hunahpu on his rump, flanked by a feathered serpent image, the rain god Chak, and several forms of Itzamna in various stages and forms of this individual. Well, the art is now preserved and we can expose, but what we discovered just recently was that below the floor, the art continues. And not only does it continue, but we expose the entire sequence of this. It continues down for 6 more vertical meters. 6 meters of art that has its original color, still in brilliant location, with none other than a serpent head with 2 fangs coming out and drops of venom out of the fang, a very ferocious Kan. The word for also for serpent is Kan. And we believe the original name of the basin was Kan, serpent. I'm going to show you the epigraphic proof of that in just a minute. But there's the Kan format in the preclassic dating between 400 and 300 BC in this particular format. And we have evidence of an enormous mask. This is the headdress, this is the jewel of a mask just in the forehead. And the mask continues down for 6 more meters to the bottom. Now, we understand the importance of preservation of this, and I designed a roof system which we put up over the Jaguar Pa Temple, and another roof system that was designed, I designed it so it would breathe. It has actually a gap between all the panels using polycarbonate system. And Fenella French of the Library of Congress here did the analysis of our electronic monitoring. Is that you?
No, she's here.
She's here? Fenella, where are you? There's Fenella. Fenella! Oh my gosh. We put electronic monitors under the building, under these buildings, and then out in the jungle. And what we were able to monitor every half hour for a year, we monitored the relative humidity and the temperature, only to discover that where the natural forest had huge swings in relative humidity and temperature, whereas the art and architecture under the roof was fairly stable in comparison to the raw forest. So armed with that information, we then designed a series of roofs, which we just completed, and now the Popol Vuh text is now under a large roof that can be seen and observed. Here it is here. Here's the Popol Vuh, and you see the roof that's now over it, providing stable humidity and stable temperatures over this thing. Now, we've brought some attention to this. We formed organized the exposition in the Quai Branly Museum in Paris a couple years ago, and we did the actual life-size scale of the Popol Vuh panels as the introduction to this. It was also on exhibition at the World's Fair in Shanghai, China. So the world is gradually becoming aware of the importance of this. Now, if I can just go to stage 2 here. To explain, to finish up here and explain a little bit about how we get collapse. Now, you've seen all the factors that lead us to complexity, all the factors that lead to social, economic, and political complexity. What are the factors that lead to its degradation? We've done excavation now on 27 major buildings at El Mirador alone, exposing art and architecture. We've discovered, though, ceramics directly on the floors of these buildings, where the Maya left these materials. And as we've increased our excavations, we've discovered both the Middle Preclassic and Late Preclassic ceramics right where the last inhabitants still had them. But we've also discovered the presence of monuments, parts of kingship, where kings were actually decorating, paying tribute. In this case, we think they're paying tribute to the hero twins because this particular individual has the 3 dots of Ishbalamke in his cheek. We believe this individual to be representing Hunahpu because his headdress has the decapitated head of his father, Hunahpu. So we think that goes way back. This is a monument we believe dates between 400 and 300 BC. It's 5 meters high, and it's broken. It's broken in myriad fragments, but we are now in the process of reconstructing that monument. And we also know that by the time of Christ, the monuments, instead of being 4 and 5 meters high, begin to be less than 80 centimeters high, about this tall. Dinky little, tiny little stones. They're building pyramids 72 meters high, okay? But they're putting monuments, little dinky stones. One of the things that's interesting about these monuments, though, is that they have little panels on the side right here. And these panels have, there's one right here too. These panels have script writing. So now, all of a sudden, writing takes a format in a very unusual and early form. This is a text we cannot read these texts. These are preclassic texts. We can't read the text at San Bartolo either. It's a different system. It's David Stewart scratched his head, Stanley Gunther scratched his head trying to figure out how we read these texts. And we need a larger corpus. It's just a matter of time until we have the corpus to understand these patterns. But we find numerous broken monuments and scattered monuments throughout the sites and other evidence of texts that date to the preclassic. This is an interesting text here, which looks like an early form of the verb or an adjective, chan, or sky. And here is what we believe is the word for man, or winik. So it's kan or chan winik, meaning snake or sky man. And then, of course, the word for ahau, or lord, is also inscribed on another preclassic example. One of the things that we found at the site of Tintal in 2004 was the presence of a royal burial. This burial had stingray spines. It was a king. He was buried with 6 other individuals. But the jades that he had with him were inscribed jades. And the jade here is the jade. This is the glyph. We can read this one. This is a glyph very clearly that says ahau, or Lord. And the little squiggly you see right here is our serpent. This is snake Lord, or Kan Ahau, Lord of Kan. Well, we find other examples of this. This is a bedrock carving found at El Mirador, excavated by Edgar Soyuk in 2003. This is a 6 meter by 6 meter bedrock carving in bedrock. And there's a text along the side, and the bottom glyph here says, Kuhul Kan Ahau. Here it is right here, Kuhul Kan Ahau. And this is the way it was painted 800 years later in the classic period. We actually think this was the original name of the basin, was Kan. The whole basin was named Kan, meaning the polity. This is significant because Calakmul was never named Kan. Its name is Chiknab, or Oshtetun. And so, but the kings of Calakmul called themselves Lords of Kan. Okay? Lords of Kan. But they do that because they're referring to the earlier polity that gave them the legacy that they had. The earliest glyphs at Calakmul are nothing to do with the serpent. It has to do with a bat, a tzotz. It's not Kan. Becomes Kan much later in time, and recognize that. But what we do know, by 150 AD, this entire vibrant economic and political system collapsed. They left whole vessels on the floors of their buildings, whole plates. Look at all the ceramics here, where they just walked away and left this stuff forever. Even, not only in the monumental architecture, but even in the residential zones in the peripheral areas of the site. Here's the surface area. Here's a pre-classic bowl right on the packed earthen floor of a hut. And that's the same vessel, by the way, as this one here, and reconstructed. But even the residential vessels had a limited amount. These whole vessels are found on every single building we've excavated, showing that they walked away and they left these artifacts right on the floors of their buildings, and they are preclassic. Meaning that nobody came back 300 years later or 400 years later and said, look at this unusual blue bottle. I'm going to take it home and put it on the mantle. They walked away forever, and they left these areas. We find them throughout. This is the reconstructed vessels, these preclassic vessels that we find on the floors of these vessels. Now, to understand this, David Wall of the U.S. Geological Survey and Tom Schreiner of the University of California, Berkeley, we took 17 vertical meters of pollen cores from lakes on the western edge of the basin. The winds come from the eastern side, and they go across the basin, and the lakes on the western side are recipients of all the pollen. So we take those cores and stored them in a special room built specifically at Berkeley for this, in which we can now reconstruct the history of the botanical history of the basin. What we see, though, is by 2600 BC, a very clear presence of corn. Sure enough, it appears even in the pollen records. Not only do we have it in carbon-14, but we have it in the pollen as well at that date. And we have then major occupation starting by around 1300, 1200 BC, a major change in all of the existing vegetation where we have a series of occupations. We do have some interesting phenomena such as a slow abandonment by around 400 BC of the area, and then a complete abandonment that occurred by 150 AD. Then a gradual reoccupation, and then another complete abandonment by 900 AD to the present day. Now these pollen samples we show the evidences of both collapses. The collapse that occurred at 150 AD and the collapse that occurred at 900 AD, and this is all very clear in the pollen record, and it matches the archaeology. Now, how do we have a collapse? You remember I told you the economic engine of their whole society were those marsh mud, that swamp muck that they were dragging by the thousands of tons and farming the same piece of ground for 1,000 years. To renovate your field, just another little layer of mud, and you renovated your field. And they were doing that. Well, we find that layer of marsh mud in the swamps buried under 2 to 3 meters of sterile clay. Here's the marsh muck right here. Here it is, you see the layers right here. Here's the layer in here. It's buried under 2 to 3 meters of sterile clay. How did it get buried under that much sediment? We begin to look at the processes of deforestation. How would you have that much sediment running into these swamps? Well, we know they weren't doing the milpa system where they slash and burn agriculture because they're farming the same piece of ground for 1,000 years. And the culprit we suspected was lime production, the burning of lime. And discovered through time that the thickness of floors began gradually thicker and thicker. By 800 BC, the average floor was 3 to 4 centimeters thick. By the time of Christ, the average floor was 11 centimeters to 12 centimeters thick, and in some cases, 40 to 50 centimeters thick. Now, why do you need a floor this thick? It's like saying out here outside the Library of Congress, we need a cement sidewalk, and it has to be 3 yards thick. Why? Because you can. Okay? In a show I did with Mel Gibson and Diane Sawyer, the question was brought up, why do people urinate in gold-plated toilets? Because they can. Okay? It's human, we're kind of wired to be that way. And we suspected floors. We analyzed 144 floors from the Mirador Basin and discovered the same pattern of thickness through time of these floors. And what we then did is the experimental work. I sent a scholar from Berkeley, Tom Schreiner, to all over Mesoamerica. It took us 6 years to document with all the lime production systems in Mesoamerica. How much wood does it take? And how much limestone does it take to make how much lime? Lime cement. Discovered it takes 5 to 6 tons of stone and 5 to 6 tons of wood to make 1 ton of lime. So what the Maya were doing essentially is denuding, and by the way, this lime cannot be burned with dry wood because of the fluctuation in temperature from hot, very hot to cool too fast. It has to be green wood, which provides a stable temperature at 900 degrees centigrade. So they were taking every available green tree, every single one. The Pyramid of Tigre, for example, and we did the experimental work. Here's our experimental kilns. We even brought, on one particular occasion, all the lime experts from the Maya world into one area and had them build their particular kiln so we could monitor how much wood and how much stone it took to do that. And they're all consistent, all consistently the same amount, the same ratios. Discovered then that essentially they destroyed their forest just to cover the Pyramid of Tigre with its last layer of plaster. Required the complete deforestation of 1,263 acres of trees, every single tree. And they did that because they could. Mel Gibson tried to show that in the film Apocalypto. You know, when he did the film Apocalypto, here's the pile of lime that we have around the sets there. And this is Hollywood's version of the deforestation. This is real deforestation. This little patch of lime you see in here, this is they burn massive amounts of wood to make lime today. And this is all what we were trying to show, the processes of burning lime in a form of what we call conspicuous consumption. The same attitude is evident in the stonework. For example, at 800 BC, the stonework averages 25 by 25 by 28 centimeters. They're about the size of this book, actually. A stone, okay? A little thicker, but that's consistent in their size. By the time about 600 BC, the stones become massive. I put 90 centimeters. A lot of these stones are 1.5 meters long and half a meter thick and half a meter high. They're enormous stones, but the long axis, like you see here, is exposed. So you have the long axis exposed, which is the most useful exposure of stone. But by 300 BC, they take the same size stones and they run them lengthwise into the building. So that instead of one stone forming it, if I could put two of these books together side by side, this is the maximum use of stone. When you turn it this way, it takes a lot more stones to cover the same surface area. And the Maya were doing this. By 300 BC, they were laying these enormous, you see the guy standing here, these enormous stones with a long axis into the building. And why? Because they could. They had the economic and political clout to do so. To understand that process, we excavated 6 quarries, recovered the stone tools out of those quarries, and actually replicated the stone tools and quarried blocks, calculated how many man-days of labor did it take to make a block. And not only that, but how do we transport the block? It takes, for a 1,000-pound stone, it takes 12 men. 10 men to carry it and 2 men to stabilize it. So it doesn't get, when you're carrying a 1,000-pound stone, it gets the dancing on you. It's a pretty hefty problem to deal with. So what we know is the Maya were carving and quarrying on an industrial scale. Enormous stones that were being transported into the cities and building incredible architecture. And it caused their collapse, caused a complete demise of their society. It buried, when the deforestation occurred, that natural clays ran down into those swamps and it buried them under 2 to 3 meters of sterile clay. Now, if you can't eat, you're in deep trouble, okay? It takes a few days to sink in sometimes, but we realize that we have to do something different if we're not going to eat. And that's why we explain, not only do we explain an abandonment, but you explain a collapse, because it's not that the Maya didn't want to return to the Mirador Basin. They couldn't return to the Mirador Basin because they didn't have the economic and capability of maintaining a population of that size. Well, in short, the city was abandoned by 150 AD. One of the interesting things, though, is some of the events that occurred after the city was abandoned. At about 300 AD, on this part of the Tigre Pyramid, right up here, we discovered evidence of an intrusion by Teotihuacan, which happened to be, these are obsidian points here, all from the highlands. We have actually 297 obsidian points, green Pachuca obsidian from the highlands of Mexico. You see all the points here. All these are atlatl darts. And then you have the Maya points, which are here. And we even found the human bodies with the points in the bodies. So there must have been maybe 100 people in the city at this period of time. 100 people, maximum. And Teotihuacan saw fit to come out and do away with these guys. We suspect that Tikal was behind this. By this time, Tikal had jumped in bed, so to speak, with Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan had embassies as early as 200 AD in Tikal. And by 378 AD, there was an intrusion by a guy named Siakak that came in and installed a boy king 11 years of age at Tikal. Well, we think this period of time, here's the chert points here, the Maya defending themselves, and the obsidian points. We're in the process now, I've been working on this for some time, of analyzing the points. The bet is that the obsidian points will have Maya blood on them, and the chert points will have Mexican blood on them. So we're trying to do that. We have discovered, though, human tissue on the points and the red blood cells, but it's still been pretty tough. We're having a tough time extracting that material, and we're hoping the technology will improve where we can theoretically extract the DNA from these points. By this time, the city was essentially abandoned. And around 700 AD, small groups of inhabitants returned, built small little structures This is the largest structures dating to the late classic period, but they were putting portraits of ancestors in these buildings. These are the ancestors that are placed in these buildings and doing a kind of a ritual. But they were also, while they were living among the ruins, as small settlers among the ruins, they were painting a unique type of pottery, which we call codex-style pottery. I had the privilege today of looking at the Kislak, and both Art Dunkelman and I were looking at the Mirador ceramics at the Kislak Museum in Coral Gables, Florida. We also saw the collections down below in this museum, in which we saw codex-style pottery. You will never find a single piece of this ceramic in Tikal, for example. They don't exist at Copan or Palenque. You don't find a single piece. They were only produced in mass in the Mirador Basin. We even excavated the residence of one of the famous painters. This is a painting of structure 103 at Nakbe, and the pots that we know this guy painted. And by the way, I saw one down below that this guy painted as well. We know that we found these ceramics painted by these incredible scribes as they're living in the ruins, painting codex-style pottery, and exclusively produced only in the Mirador Basin by isolated hamlet groups. And these ceramics are unique in that they not only do they tell intricate scenes of cosmology and ideology, but we have intricate scenes of listing of kings. And these are the dates, the verbs, the names of kings, which are portrayed here that we now believe to be a retrospective history of kings. These aren't any of the kings associated with Calakmul, any of the kings associated with any of the classic sites that we have, and the dates don't correspond. But these dates do fit, beginning in 392 BC. And so we believe this to be a history of kings from 392 BC to AD 20 in this period of time, including scenes like this is found in a burial at Calakmul. The neutron activation was done of this particular vessel and found to be none other from Nakbe in the Mirador Basin. So they were painting pots within the basin and given as gifts. Now, because of the epigraphy and the study of the glyphs, we know the tremendous interaction of these cities of the classic period. Here's Calakmul and Tikal. You can see all the red lines that you see are warfare events. These are all examples of extraordinary warfare and complex events, and we know that now because of the history we get from the texts. But trying to protect this information has been an incredible battle. These, for example, all the red slashes that you see are looters' trenches, which they're placing in the cities to loot this art. Here's another example of the devastation that's occurred. In 1992, we put guards in the majority of the big cities in the Mirador Basin and saved them. But where we didn't have the money for guards, it's a complete and total devastation and destruction. Well, these cities have been abandoned since by 900 AD again, and consist of this. And we see these collapses in the pollen records. We see it in the archaeological record. And in closing, I want to point out that the Mirador Basin project is more than just stones and bones. We provide employment for up to 300 to 400 workmen. We provide educational opportunities for these guys where they learn how to read and write under our tutelage. After work during the day, they learn to read and write at night. We formed all the major companies of Guatemala together to help protect and fight to preserve the sites of the area. We brought in individuals such as Prince Albert of Monaco and Mel Gibson and Francesca Habsburg of the royal family of Austria to understand and become involved with this. We're working with the indigenous, the Maya themselves, so that they're aware of their legacy, aware for the first time of the incredible story that they have. We've had the privilege of representing Guatemala actually invited by the Chinese government to talk about cultural heritage at the World's Expo in Shanghai, China. In fact, one interesting thing about the Chinese is that here's the Bolivian, Bolivia, Chile, Venezuela. They use the Mirador Basin iconography as the theme for all of Latin America, which was kind of a fun thing. We've been working with the guides of the community guides. So here's Cynthia Pereira right here, by the way, in front of the Community Guide Association. We work to train and develop these guides from the community so that they're involved in the conservation. Working with DOI, here's Ms. Pereira again, walking after we hiked in, but these are the signs that we've now placed, interpretive panels that are now found throughout the sites so that people can see and understand what they're looking at when they go to these areas. And we have a modest infrastructure for tourism and for capability of adapting to this, these rugged conditions. We have the community visitor center. We have the schools involved, and we even placed 72 computers in the little grade schools surrounding the basin. So for the first time, these kids have an alternative to looting, poaching, narcotics trafficking, and prostitution. We're breaking that chain. And these little kids, for the first time, are handling a keyboard as well as anybody in Guatemala. We brought the attention to, by major exhibits in Paris and other areas. We're now producing a series of books that come out on it's volume 2, by the way, of the insects of the Mirador Basin. But these volumes are all coming out this year, dealing with the flora of the Mirador Basin and the story of the basin all coming out. We were the cover story of Smithsonian Magazine. So the Smithsonian's aware of this. We're working with the Congress of the country, where they can now become involved in the permanent protection of these areas, so that an area that is defined geographically as known by its ancient and state can be preserved. How do you make it economically sustainable? We're never going to say forest because it's pretty and green and has orchids. The starving peasant doesn't care. His kids are starving to death. He's hungry, and he's going to do what it takes to do it. So we think that by using a common sense approach to this, we can link these cities together in a tourism package that makes it so it's advantageous. How can it be accessible so that it's sustainable? We can use a road. Number one, you have access like Tikal. But look at all the disadvantages, huge disadvantages. Not to say the least, it opens up narcotics trafficking to a heyday. Okay? We can put an airstrip in. It's cheap flights, it's cheap, direct flights, but it leaves the communities outside the patterns. Leaves the communities clear outside of this. We can use balloons. Interesting, but since the winds come from the east, we would be lucky to land in Oaxaca, and if we're unlucky, we land in Japan. We can use environmental trails, and that employs the communities, but we have huge impact because the mules have to eat ramon leaves, and you have to deforest the ramon trees. Deforestation, you have wood ticks, parasites, worms, and fecal material on all the trails. We can use a bicycle. That's interesting, a silent way to do it, but only the few of us are going to try that, right? And not only that, but 6 months out of the year is too wet. You can't ride a bicycle. The single most productive mechanism to make this sustainable economically is a miniature train. These trains exist in 120 zoos throughout the world because they're quiet, they're cheap, they're efficient, they have no impact on animals. And we think this kind of exposure, using the existing causeway system, makes a link so that we can now have eco-lodges, we can have museums, and even the Maya ball courts so that people can play the Maya games and make an impact. Are we making an impact? I think so. When you go to Flores today, you have the sign that goes to the island of Flores and another sign to El Mirador. Okay, even though it's hundreds of kilometers away, there it is. Or you have the central areas, or the tickets on ticket stubs have El Mirador there. We are making a difference. There is a viable alternative to looting and poaching and burning. Okay, and that's what we see going on today, but we use these ancient sites as that catalyst. Well, you've been a good audience. I apologize for the delay in getting this going, but thanks for your time and interest in this. Thank you, Kislak Foundation, and Jay, thank you for the privilege of being here. We hope that you all can get involved with this. We invite you to become involved. Have an interest in understanding that the conservation measures that we apply here will serve as a model for conservation in Cambodia, India, Africa, and other sites that have the economic capability of defending their forest. And if we use these sites as the kind of catalyst, then we don't have a future that is marred because the sites provide the economic justification to save these areas. And that's the only way it'll be done in the future. Thanks for your time. And if you have questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Thank you for a really inspiring lecture, both for the ancient cultures, but also for today. There were so many things you said that give us a great deal to think about our own lifestyle and lives. So thank you for that. We do have time for a few questions, and I do want to correct the fact that I didn't introduce myself. I was so anxious to get started. I have the absolute joy of serving as the Associate Librarian for Library Services. My name is Roberta Schaefer, and I welcome you, and I hope you found this evening as inspiring as I did. I want to go back to my office and just read everything I can tonight. So I see a question right there. We'll repeat them.
Looked to me like you had some Olmec influence. Is there any evidence that
It seems to be pan-Mesoamerican. We find the evidence outside of the Olmec area through the same downturned mouth. It's a pan-Mesoamerican phenomenon. But the Maya were clearly aware of the Olmec, and the Olmec clearly aware of the Maya. In fact, a lot of scholars have claimed the argument of the mother culture versus the sister cultural idea. But it appears now that it's not that the Maya didn't want to go into the lowlands, or not that the Olmec didn't want to go into the lowlands of the Maya. They couldn't go because of the powers that were there. Now, Levanta, the great Olmec site of Levanta, was sacked and burned by 400 BC. Who in the world would have the capability of sacking and burning the great site of Levanta? We suspect, because of the presence of preclassic Maya pottery at Levanta, shortly after this period of time, that it was the occupation of the Mirador Basin that had the military and economic capability.
There's a question in the back.
you referred to the triad form for the group of temples, you found out the meaning of the triad.
Yeah, I think I pointed out it's referring to, it's a symbolic creation, a symbolic representation of the creation. If the contemporary Maya are right in their assessment of the celestial hearth, we believe these to be the three stones of Maya creation. They're mentioned on Stela C at Quiriguá, by the way. Even have the names of the stones. The Maya even had the names of those stones. But it appears that they're symbolically creating the creation in all this architecture. What's also curious that it does not appear prior to 300 BC. But almost 300 BC, it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous throughout the sites. Throughout the entire length and breadth of the Mirador Basin is covered with sites that have this triadic style architecture. One of the earliest parts of El Mirador was ignored for years because it didn't have the triadic architecture. I thought it was later, only to dig in it and find out it's much, much earlier, you see. So we know that this was an innovative concept that essentially created a homogeneous society. It united them in a remarkable way. I guess a similar comparison would be our Judeo-Christian values in the United States. Essentially, we're a Judeo-Christian society, and that's kind of a homogeneous unification of our society. And they did the same thing. It launched them into the stratosphere, economically, politically, and socially. Yes, question?
Yeah, I was wondering if you can generalize the argument that you advanced for the collapse in the Mirador Basin to abandonments or collapses elsewhere in the Mayan region.
We do know that there were other factors at play here. A collapse is never monocausal, meaning there's never a single cause for a collapse. It's multi-causal, or we would have identified it long ago. But at the same time, we have a collapse in the Mirador Basin. We have evidence of a drought, fairly large scale. But we have beautiful lakes like Lake Petenitsa close by, and the Maya were not living around the lake. They weren't settling on that lake. The other question is, when the drought's over, why didn't they return? A drought may be lasting 20 years. Let's give it a maximum 20-year drought, which is unprecedented in the lowlands, but give it a 20-year period. They would still return back to that architecture, and they didn't go back. It's because they couldn't go back. Not that they didn't want to, they couldn't go back. Now, we have other sites in Mesoamerica at the same time that they're collapsing. It's not just the Mirador Basin that collapses. But we've identified, though, one of the principal causes is their own deforestation. And we see the same pattern today. I showed you at the beginning of this show the deforestation taking place today It's massive in scale. And you know, it's like, and they're complaining because of lack of rain. It's like amputating your arm and complaining because there's blood, you see. It's ridiculous. The evapotranspiration, a fascinating study by the University of Alabama, who discovered that the surface temperature in deforested areas is 7 degrees centigrade higher than under the forested areas. 7 degrees centigrade, which means that even though they get the same amount of rainfall, they're always falling behind in the deforested area and eventually become a desert because it can't catch up. And so we think that pattern is what occurred in the Preclassic in the Mirador Basin. Very, very clearly, they destroyed their environment just like we're doing today. And they're laying floors this thick. Now, when I see a floor this thick and I see a $17 trillion debt, I see the same thing. See, we're doing that. Why isn't the public in uproar about that? You see? And at the same time, they're laying floors this thick. Why wasn't the public in uproar? Well, it's just what they're doing. You know, it's going to work itself out somehow. Well, it did to their negative and the negative consequence of that behavior. We have to pay attention to history, or we're doomed to repeat it. And this is one of the great things about archaeology, is that we can see the origins, dynamics, and collapse of a society. We can't see our origins. That was too early. We can't see our demise. That's way in the future. We only live for now. But when you look at it through the lens of archaeology, you see that whole gamut of origins, dynamics, and collapse of a society. And then you say, are there parallels and patterns that are occurring today? And should we pay attention to those parallels and patterns?
I think on that note, we will let you get some water. Thank you again. Thank you all for coming, and please watch our website for other events that we have throughout the year that draw upon the treasures of the Kislak collection. Thank you again.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.